And we are live. Welcome to our regular viewers on Zoom. Welcome, dear friends, to tonight's presentation. So this Motzei Shabbat Saturday night, which, as you know, for the Jewish people, leads us into the next day, which is Sunday this year, is the fast day that is commonly known as the 17th day of Tammuz, Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. This is a perplexing day where we are given a Mishnah, a classic piece of oral Torah, that gives us a list of things that happened on this day. And it is one of the 6 fast days. It's considered one of the lighter ones. I'll explain the difference in a moment. One of the lighter fast days of the Jewish calendar. There were various calamities. There were various terrible tragedies that happened on this day. What we're going to do this evening, with your permission, my dear friends, is to go through the 5 things that the Mishnah tells us happened historically on the 17th day of the Jewish month of Tammuz. And what I want to show you is that when people usually learn this Mishnah, when we usually discuss these things, they seem like 5 fairly unrelated events. One of them stands out as really unrelated from the other 4. But what I want to show you this evening, God willing, is that these 5 things are actually blended into one and have so much in common with each other. So let's go through and let's see exactly what happened on this day historically. Now, we've spoken before how one day in the calendar may have a number of things that happened on it which are either really good or sometimes really bad. And those events will occur on that date because there are certain dates in the Jewish calendar where something very tragic happened historically. And as we travel through the year, we arrive back at that original date, which for us is the original destination. And that date itself becomes a challenge. That date itself has encoded, downloaded into it, terrible, terrible things that have happened on that day itself and will potentially reoccur in the future on that exact date. As we say in Hebrew, an event happened bayam ha'mahem in those days, b'zman hazeh, but at this time of year, on that particular day, there's a certain negative energy that is encapsulated, held within that date. And what we are meant to do through our actions when that date reoccurs in the calendar and we enter into it is to, as it were, release it, to free it of all the negative connotations and original mistakes that are connected to it. Let me explain a little bit better in relation to this fast day that we have coming this Sunday, the 17th day of the month of Tammuz. And we are told, my friends, of a number of things that happened on this exact day. Number 1, when the Jewish people left Egypt, they stood 50 days later at Mount Sinai. And when they stood at Mount Sinai, God revealed himself and gave us the Torah, specifically at that point in the form of the Luchot, the 10 Commandments that were written on 2 separate tablets. It happened to be that 40 days after that, an event occurred that the Jewish people at that time worshipped a golden calf. This was a calf that they created themselves with their own gold. And they melted it down and they made an idol. Now, why and how they would do it at this point, we're going to talk about. But when Moses descended from the mountain 40 days after the revelation at Mount Sinai, he saw this, he took those tablets and he smashed them. This event, that smashing of the first set of luchot happened on the 17th day of the Jewish month of Tammuz, which, as I've already told you, is going to reoccur and reappear on this Sunday, a day that we consider to be a day of mourning. As well as that, number 2, during the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem, this is the first temple that stood many years later. The other 4, by the way, are going to relate to the temple in Jerusalem and Jerusalem itself. The Jews, because of the siege, were not able to bring sacrifices, korbanot. One particular one was called the tamid. And the tamid was a sheep sacrifice that they would bring in the temple as a special tribute to God every single day. Hence the expression, tamid. Since there was a lack of sheep, they were no longer able to bring that particular korban, that sacrifice. This was a breakdown in the entire spiritual order of our connection to God through the city of Jerusalem and the temple that King Solomon had built. There was a breakdown in the order. That event also happened on the 17th of Tammuz. Many years later, there was a Roman general called Apostomus. And Apostomus decided to make a public display of the worst thing that a person can do. And he did this to break the spirit and the back of the Jewish people who were rebelling and not following the Roman rule that had entered Jerusalem and had taken control over large parts of the land of Israel. So what he did was, he took our most secret, special, and holiest object, our Torah, and he made a public spectacle for as many people as he could to see. He burned the Torah, our holy Torah. This Roman general did it in front of the eyes of thousands, as far as we know, of Jews and Romans as well. And this killed us. Is there a worse sight, my friend? Is there a worse sight than seeing our holy Torah go up in flames? That event happened on the 17th day of the Jewish month of Tammuz. Not only that, some say it was him, some say it was others. Then an idol was taken and it was placed in the holy Heichal, in the holiest part of the temple in Jerusalem. That means the entire temple was defiled at that time via an idol that was placed right there in the middle. And this obviously was heartbreaking to the Jewish people. Not only had the land of Israel, our homeland, been overtaken by the Romans, but also Jerusalem had it, our temple, and an idol. The thing that we are the most keenest to remove from this world was placed punct right there in the middle on this day. And finally, and this is probably what the 17th of Tammuz is most famous for, but each one of these 5 things we're going to see are very, very relevant. The Romans at the time of the Second Temple made a beeline for the temple in Jerusalem. And they said, we're going to destroy our temple, just like the Babylonians destroyed the first temple 400 years before or so. We are going to come and destroy your temple as well. But the Jewish people had something very special. They had walls that were surrounding and keeping Jerusalem safe. And these walls had stature and they had presence. The Romans realized if they're going to get to the temple, they're going to have to get through these walls. And they came with battering rams, and they came with elephants, whatever they were using those days, and they smashed and they breached a section of the wall large enough that would allow all the Roman troops to come through and make their way in to destroy the temple in Jerusalem. That entire event, from the breaking of the walls to the destruction of the temple, took 3 weeks. A 3-week period where Jerusalem was ransacked. Thousands on thousands of people, Jewish people, who were just living their lives in the holy city of Jerusalem were killed and slaughtered in the most terrible fashion. All of this started with the breach of the walls in Jerusalem on the 17th day of the month of Tammuz. Now we're going to talk about Tisha B'Av, which is going to occur in the same fashion, 3 weeks after we get from the 17th of Tammuz. And we're going to count 3 weeks, especially the last 9 days. And Tisha B'Av is going to be the fast day, which culminates the 3 weeks that started with the breach of the walls of Jerusalem and ended up with the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. So Tisha B'Av is going to be one fast day. But most people don't realize that Tisha B'Av is the end of a process that started on the 17th of Tammuz. And the 17th of Tammuz isn't just the start of the 3 weeks, it's a day of mourning in and of itself. So we're kind of like dealing with bookends. What started on the 17th of Tammuz culminated with the destruction of the temple itself, and it took 3 weeks for that entire process to happen, probably the worst 3 weeks in Jewish history. So we're going to talk about the temple in Jerusalem, and we're going to talk about the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av, nearer that time. But what I want to focus on is these seemingly 5 unconnected or disconnected things that actually happened on the 17th of Tammuz. And we're going to learn something really, really important, not just about the day itself, and not only just about Jerusalem, but even the walls of Jerusalem and the other 4 things that we mentioned. So let's talk about them. Because when we look at this list again, that the walls of Jerusalem were breached on the 17th of Tammuz in the year 69 CE, that an idol was placed in the Heichal, in the holy temple in Jerusalem by the Romans, that Apostomus burned a Torah. And by the way, don't think this was the first or last time that a Torah was burned. Our enemies know this is a weak spot for us. For us, the Jewish people, the Torah, obviously what it represents, but the scroll itself, our Horah, Torah is our light, it's our teaching. And for someone to come along, like they did at the time of the Crusades, like they did in the times of the pogroms, like they did in the times of the Holocaust, you may have seen devastating photographs, even up to the modern day, where they take Torah and they burn them for our eyes. People think, what do you care? You're burning a piece of parchment. It's got words on it. Just write another one. We don't see it that way. This is a holy treasure for our people. It's something we love. We don't worship it, but we love it. And that's why just like we don't worship our children, but we love our children too. And we hug and kiss our children, and we hug and kiss our Torah, because it represents everything that we are. It represents the ultimate connection that we, the Jewish people, have with God in heaven. And so when that Torah went up in flames, back then, when Apostomus did that to us, and the Crusades and the pogroms and Chamelki and all the other terrible individuals who did such a evil public display of shame upon us, the Jewish people, it's a knife in our heart. And not only that, I've said, of course, the Luchot were broken as well by Moses on this day. Now, of those 5 things, one of them really, really stands out. And which one is that? Well, you're going to have to say that it was the breaking of the tablets when Moses saw the Jewish people worshipping the golden calf. What's that doing over there? I hear that the Jewish people had a beautiful temple in Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is our holy city. Everything about it. You know, the Torah tells us that every 4 steps we walk in the land of Israel is a mitzvah. That's what the Gemara tells us. And the Rambam brings that down to halacha. Even more so, the holy city of Jerusalem, the capital, our eternal capital, the place where Jacob sat up on the mountain and fell asleep and had a vision of a ladder. and he saw angels ascending and descending, and he woke up and said, wow, Gizeh Shara Shemayim, this is the gateway to heaven. He realized that Jerusalem was the place where heaven and earth connected. And that's why his grandfather Abraham brought his father Isaac as a sacrifice on that mountain, as a place of teaching what we should and what we shouldn't do. And that's why King David selected that mountain to be the future site of the temple that his son Solomon was able to build. This is Shara Shemayim. It's the gateway to heaven. That's what it is. So I understand that we mourn, that we're upset about the breaching of the walls and the burning of the Torah in Jerusalem and the Heichal, our holy temple, being defiled by an idol, and the lack of the Tamid offering that was now not able to be brought because of the siege. But what's that got to do with the smashing of the tablets by Moses when he saw us worshipping a golden calf? And the answer is, it's all about that, and it's really, really relevant to this very day. As in, the 17th of Tammuz still holds inside it the challenge, the problem that we, the Jewish people, still have on this day. Let me explain. What do these things have in common? Well, let's go back. Let's go back to how it all began, because the first ever Shivas of Tammuz that we talk about is actually the one where Moses smashed the tablets. And let's try to figure out a little bit about what happened. Because if it happened then, Bayam Mehem, Bazman Hazeh, it happened in those days, but it happened at this time, and this time still exists. That means the problem that happened when he smashed those tablets must still exist today. And the fact that we don't have a third and final temple means that that problem does still exist today. Let's go through this together. We know, as we said, the Jewish people left Egypt in the Jewish year 2448. And we traveled and eventually arrived in the Sinai desert. And we stood around a mountain called Har Sinai, the mountain of Sinai. And on it, God spoke to us, which we celebrate as Shavuot, with the giving of the Torah to the Jewish people. And this was an amazing, incredible time. And it came as well as the teaching and hearing God as two luchot, two tablets, and engraved, etched inside them were Aseret Dibrot, 10 commandments. We've already mentioned they weren't commandments, they were statements, ideas, life-giving principles. That's another discussion, not for now. But let's jump forward. Let's jump forward 40 days, because Moses actually stayed on that mountain. Here's the rest of the story you may not be aware of. And on that mountain he remained, miraculously, with God. We are told, learning various parts of the Torah. 40 days after God revealing himself to the Jewish people and giving us the Torah, Moses remained on the mountain. However, there was a certain miscalculation of days. And although he said, I'll return within 40 days, that first day was not included in that count. And so Moses appeared to have not returned when he said that he would, 40 days after the revelation of God at Mount Sinai. And the Jewish people got very, very nervous and very anxious. And there was a lot of murmuring, so much so that the Jewish people went to Aaron, Moses' older brother, the high priest, and said, what's going on? Where is Moses? He has disappeared. He's not here like he said he would be. We need a God to take us into Israel. And they took their gold, and Aaron had to fight them off and create a certain tactic or strategy. So he threw the gold in, and out popped, or was formed, a golden calf. And they said, this is the God we need. This is what's going to replace Moses. Because we don't have Moshe Rabbeinu. So instead, we have this golden calf, and they started to worship it. However, they miscalculated, and a day later, Moses did return like he said he would, and he saw this sight. He saw them just 40 days after hearing God and receiving the Torah, the tablets. He saw what they did, and he took these tablets and he smashed them as a statement, a great, great statement. There's many interpretations of what form this smashing took. Some say that he smashed them and the letters, which obviously weren't there because there were holes etched inside, but somehow they floated up to heaven, and the weight of these stones became so much that Moses himself had to break them. But whatever it is, this was a very major statement to wake them up to what they had done. Well, what exactly had they done? Were they just worshipping an idol? Or did they do something much, much worse? Actually, they did. And this is something that we are still apt to do today. And it goes like this. You see, this wasn't the first time that they wanted to replace one thing with another. If you go back to the giving of the Torah, God spoke the first 2 commandments to the Jewish people. But they turned around and said, wow, this is too intense. We can't handle God speaking to us. And that's why the first 2 commandments are in the first person. God directly spoke to the entire Jewish people, but they said, we can't handle this. Moshe Rabbeinu, you act as our intermediary. We can't handle this intensity of God speaking to us. So you know what? You listen to the other 8 commandments and you relay them to us. And that's exactly what happened, which is why the remaining commandments are in the second person and not in the first person. That may not seem so bad and pretty understandable. It's a very intense experience, whatever that means, to hear God himself. But instead, they found an intermediary. In that case, it was Moses. 40 days later, they actually did the same thing. But instead of finding an intermediary for God, they lost, or they thought they lost Moses, and so they found an intermediary for him. In this case, a golden calf. You see, when they made that golden calf, they weren't rejecting God. Not at all. They wanted a connection with God. They just didn't know how to do it directly. So what they did was they replaced God. They replaced Moses, I should say, as their intermediary with the golden calf. Now let's look at the other 4 things that we mentioned, because each one of them is so important to us, and each one of them was destroyed on the 17th of Tammuz. Number 1, the Torah, very special to us, destroyed, broken, and burned on the 17th day of the month of Tammuz. The walls of Jerusalem, our holy city, Shara Shemayim, the gateway to heaven, those walls were breached and they were broken. So to the Heichal, the holy center, epicenter, place where we bring sacrifices to God and felt the closest connection to God, done, destroyed, gone. Torah, walls, we have the lack of the Heichal, and we have the tablets as well that were broken. So we have Torah, Heichal, we have the walls, and we have the tablets. What do these things have in common? Something very important. Each one of them is an intermediary. Each one of them is where we put our focus rather than on a direct relationship with God. That's really what this Sunday's fast, my friends, is all about. The 17th of Tammuz isn't just a time of us mourning the destruction of the walls that led to an eventual destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. It's the reason why the temple in Jerusalem was initially even threatened. It's because we sometimes, as Jews, put more faith into symbols and objects, special objects, holy objects. But even so, we sometimes put more importance and connection with the object than with God himself. We did it with Moses. We said we need an intermediary. You don't. You can have a direct relationship with God. And as soon as Moses left, they did a Egel Masecha. Egel Masecha means a molten calf, a calf that is made from molten, in this case, gold. But actually the word Masecha also means a mask. You see, what they were scared of and what we are still scared of to this day is making a direct relationship with God, which we don't need an intermediary for. We don't even need a Moshe Rabbeinu for. Every single Jew, every person has a direct line to God himself. But unfortunately, what we sometimes do is find an intermediary. It may be the Torah itself, rather than connecting to God. It may be the Heichal. It may be a trip to Israel, Jerusalem. All these things are so special and precious. But in the end, they're a Masecha. They're getting in the way. Because what we need to do as Jews is to pour our hearts out directly to God. And if we don't, if we just use these as symbolic representations of God, God's like, well, you haven't done well. I want a direct relationship with you. If we just sit in our synagogues or our home and just read our prayers and just read them by rote without feeling a moment's connection to God, then what's the good of the prayer book? The prayer book has become a substitute, like the walls, like the Torah, like the golden calf, like Moses. And God is telling us, I don't want intermediaries. Don't put your faith in objects and symbols. They're important. They can inspire you. Jerusalem is very, very important to our people. It's our Shara Shemayim, but that's what it is. It's a gateway to heaven. It isn't heaven itself. And so every single one of us are still mourning, not just Jerusalem, but what we're actually doing is mourning a direct connection that we have with God himself. And that, my friends, is really the secret of the 70th day of the month of Tammuz. That day that begins the 3 weeks leading to Tisha B'Av. And when we get close to Tisha B'Av, we're going to talk more about Jerusalem and what led to the real destruction of the temple. But it all starts here. It starts many, many years before, when the Jewish people were at Mount Sinai, and we had this direct connection to God's divine consciousness, and we said, too much. And we're all guilty of it. In all our relationships, aren't we? We have this amazing relationship with a spouse, with a friend, with a child. And we're like, I can't handle that real relationship, so I'm going to find an intermediary. Is that what your spouse wants? They want an intermediary, or do they want a direct connection to you? Do my children just want that gift? They do. But they also want that connection with me, the giver of that gift. That's what's really happening during these 3 weeks. Are we seeking real connections with people? And these are days of mourning. We're going to remove distractions as much as possible as we try to rebuild that direct connection with each other and with God himself. And that's going to take effort, because it's safe to have intermediaries. It's safe not to directly look into your spouse's eyes and deal with a challenge and deal with a problem. It's easy not to look into your children's eyes and deal with the challenges they're having. But if you don't, that relationship is not going to be built and is not going to be culminating in the real direct one-on-one that we have. God wants us to connect to him directly. God also wants us to connect to each other directly as well. Shivas of Tammuz, 17th day of Tammuz, is a breakdown of that connection, of creating intermediaries, of putting too much effort into things and not the relationship and the connection itself. From the days of Moses right through to the second temple, the first temple, the second temple, right through to this day. And so for just a moment on Sunday, whether you're fasting or not, whether you're praying or not, the reality still surrounds us. Are we authentic? Are we real? Are we trying our best to keep our relationships alive, authentic? Although it's difficult and challenging, and it's very easy to find intermediaries, are we willing to face our challenges head on? Are we willing to talk to God? Are we just reading through our prayers, or are we connecting directly to God? This, my friend, is the secret to all relationships and the ultimate relationship, which is the relationship to God. Do we see Jerusalem as the Shar Shamayim, or do we see God as the ultimate destination for all of our relationships? May this be the last 17th of Tammuz that we have to encounter. Next week, God willing, we're going to continue this journey as we make our way into the 3 weeks, trying to figure out how we need to relate towards each other and God, trying to fix the mistakes of our ancestors and us as well. Thank you for listening. Those who are around tomorrow at 12, we will continuing our discussion of getting better at being you. And tomorrow's topic actually is going to be on toxic positivity. That'll be tomorrow at 12. Hope you can join us. Thank you for joining us. Have a great night.